Good day everyone, I am Joannah Burlas and today I'm gonna discuss about the Rhetoric of Aristotle. But before that, I'm gonna do a little discussion about the history of the rhetoric so that you can understand the lesson more. In ancient Greece, knowing how to speak in public is a part of the citizen's democratic responsibility. When Rome ruled the world, rhetorical ability was a survival skill since there is a lot of political debate in the society. Greek philosopher Plato regarded rhetoric as an insincere praise. He described it as a knack or attempts to make things seem better than they really are, like the use of euphemism discussed in our subject cultural anthropology. Plato's ideal discourse was dialogue meant for private rather than public consumption. This philosophic one-on-one mode of communication is known as dialectic, which is already discussed in the previous lessons. Plato hoped that philosophic dialectic would replace public rhetoric because he wants speaking to be intimate to better understand the audience. However, his best student Aristotle rejuvenated public rhetoric as a serious academic subject. Hence, we have the Rhetoric of Aristotle. Now we're gonna proceed to the lesson. So, I know that we are all familiar with Aristotle, but here is a statue of him for reference. He is the one who theorized the rhetoric. So the theme of our lesson for today is rhetoric making persuasion probable. Rhetoric simply means to discover all possible means of persuasion. It is applicable in public speaking and making speeches. In public speaking or making speeches, we don't just speak. We have the goal to persuade the people. The rhetoric can be really helpful if you want to accomplish that. Moving on, we have three classifications of persuasion, which is the courtroom or forensic speaking, ceremonial or epidictic speaking, political or deliberative speaking. Courtroom speaking is used in the courtroom setting. It is when judges are trying to make a just decision about a criminal case. Notice that in a courtroom, different parties provide their evidences, statements, and arguments. They do that in order to persuade the judge to make a decision. That is an example of judicial rhetoric centered on guilt or innocence. The second classification of persuasion is ceremonial speaking. This is used in a ceremonial setting like funerals, baptism, graduation, and etc. It grants praise or blame on the another for the benefit of present-day audiences. For example, in graduation ceremonies, the school head gives a speech for the graduates to praise them. In baptism, where the priest also speaks some words to honor the people who are baptized. Or in a funeral, where close people to the deceased gives a speech to honor the dead, and some even voice out their frustrations or blame someone for the death. That is still ceremonial speaking. Lastly, we have political speaking. It is used in a political setting. It attempts to influence legislators or voters who decide future policy. For example, a presidential debate in which politicians who ran for the position are giving their speech and debating so that they can persuade the voters. Or in the legislative branch of the government in which different politicians speak about law proposals and in which they talk and give their thoughts and evidences either to approve that proposal, improve it, or reject it. If you have a confusion between political and ceremonial speaking, political is solely used in politics, while ceremonial speaking can be used in any ceremony, may it be school-related, religion-related, or even in government ceremonies like the State of the Nation address of the President. So I hope that the classification of persuasion is clear. Now let's move on. I already talked about the little details about dialectic, and right here, I have a comparison of the dialectic and the rhetoric. So, dialectic is one-on-one, and on the other hand, rhetoric is one person addressing many. Dialectic is the search for truth, and the rhetoric demonstrates truth already found. Dialectic answered general philosophical questions like, what is the meaning of life? What is love? Is God real? Those are philosophical questions. Rhetoric, on the other hand, addresses specific practical questions related to racism, discrimination, misogyny, questions related to topics that are experienced in real life. Dialectic is about certainty and rhetoric is about probability. There are two means of persuasion, which is the artistic and inartistic. Artistic means of persuasion uses internal proofs that appeals to a person's logic, ethics, and emotions. Internal proofs means it is from the person who is persuading the listeners, hence the use of the word internal. On the other hand, inartistic means of persuasion uses external evidences that speaker did not create, for example, results of surveys, studies, journals, facts, and etc. The rhetoric uses the artistic means of persuasion. Now for the rest of the lesson, we're going to use the speech I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. since it has the aspects of the rhetoric. So the speech I Have a Dream is 17 minutes long. So if you want to listen to it, you can search it in YouTube. You can search for the text of the speech in Google. However, right here I have a summary of the speech since the speech is too long. So okay. In his I Have a Dream speech, minister and civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. outlines the long history of racial injustice in America, and he encourages his audience to hold their country accountable to its own founding promises of freedom, justice, and equality. Basically, the speech is about racial discrimination in America. He emphasized that the citizens should address the problem and they should make their country accountable for the freedom, justice, and equality promises that weren't met. Moving on, the rhetoric have three rhetorical proof, which are logos or logical proof, ethos or ethical proof, and pathos or the emotional proof. I think we are all familiar with these terms since it is in our lesson in philosophy in grade 11. The first rhetorical proof is the logical proof. It has two forms, which is the enthymeme and the example. So, the enthymeme uses deductive logic or reasoning using one or more statements to come up with a conclusion. It moves from a global principle to specific truth. On the other hand, the example uses inductive reasoning or gathering observations to come up with a conclusion. It draws a final conclusion from specific cases. So the enthymeme is an incomplete version of a formal deductive syllogism that is created by leaving out a premise already accepted by the audience or by leaving an obvious conclusion unstated. For example, I say, all people face different battles every day. You face different battles every day. Without me saying it, you can conclude that I too face different battles every day. Here's another example from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. All people are created equal. That is the major or the general premise. Then, the minor premise is, I am a person. In conclusion, I am equal to other people. In enthymeme, you can leave a premise or a conclusion unstated. I can choose not to state the conclusion, which is, I am equal to other people. And you can draw that from the statements that I provided. If the example is a syllogism, this is how it would look like. God will reward non-violence. The minor premise is, we are pursuing our dream non-violently. In conclusion, God will grant us our dreams since we are not violent. Okay? Basically, enthymeme guides the audience to draw a conclusion based on the given premises. Again, the examples provided in the slides are from King's speech, I Have a Dream, since it is a giant enthymeme. Aristotle said that audience analysis is crucial to make an enthymeme effective. This is why we leave a premise unstated so the audience can realize it on their own, which will make the enthymeme effective. The second logical proof is example. I know that we are all familiar with the word example and we all understand what it is and how it's used since we use this word a lot, but still, here is a definition. In the speech, only few examples of discrimination is mentioned. You might think that since only few examples are mentioned, then it will be less believable. However, you are wrong. The news and TV every night and other examples are already obvious to his audience. Martin Luther King Jr. does not need to state the obvious because his audience supplied its own vivid image since the news about racial discrimination is rampant in their country. That was the logical proof. Moving on to the second proof, which is the ethical proof. Ethos is the perceived credibility which comes from the speaker's intelligence, character, goodwill toward the audience, as these personal characteristics are revealed through the message. In public speaking, a speaker must be credible, and audience impression begin even before the speech starts. So according to the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, use what language you will, you can never say anything but who you are. That basically means that you can say anything you want in public speaking or in making speeches, but the image you have as a person before the speech starts speaks volume of who you are. So if you have been a bully before and people know about it and then you proceed to talk about anti-bullying, then you will lose your credibility. You're not in the position to talk about that and people will not believe you. They will not pay attention. So remember that audience impression begin even before the speech starts. There are three qualities that build high credibility: intelligence, character, and goodwill. Number one is perceived intelligence, practical wisdom or phronesis. Audience judge intelligence by mutual beliefs and ideas. Establish strong value identification or connection. So as King said, my idea of an agreeable speaker is one who agrees with me. So basically, a person will perceive you as intelligent if you have the same ideas and beliefs. If you have a mutual connection, then he or she automatically perceive you as intelligent. Number two, virtuous character. Speaker's image as a good and honest person. King emphasized that he is against violence and being racist. That shows his character because ever since he is in his position, he always talk about it and he always say that he is against it and it is continuous. That shows that he is a good character. Number 3, goodwill. Positive judgment of the intention towards the audience. In King's speech, he shows that he is not hating on the oppressor. He emphasized that they should stop and address racial injustice and never said to hate on the oppressors. That shows his goodwill. He knows what is the morally right thing to do. A person's goodwill will be shown if he or she knows what is the right thing to do and sticks to it. For Aristotle, one can have intelligence and character yet not have the audience interest. Now we are here in the third rhetorical proof, which is the emotional proof. Pathos, emotional proof which comes from the feelings the speech draws out of those who hear it. It is about the emotions that you feel about the speech. Aristotle offered this proof not to take advantage of audience emotion. He made this proof as a corrective measure to audience's emotions since our emotions affects our decisions. Right here are Aristotle's catalog of two opposite feelings. Anger versus mildness. When a person is prevented from fulfilling a need or reminding them of differences, they feel angry. When an offender is seen as sorry, deserves praise, or has great power, the audience will calm down. You need to deliver your speech in a way that draws the emotions that you want the audience to feel, if it's anger or mildness. Second catalog, love or friendship versus hatred. Similarity is key to warmth. Speakers should point out same goals, experiences, attitudes, and desires. With positive forces, an enemy can create a solidarity or agreement. So, you have to find a common ground between you and your audience to create friendship or love instead of hate. So, the more the difference is between you and your audience, the more you will draw feelings of hatred from them. Next is fear versus confidence. Fear comes from a mental image of potential harm. What you should do is paint vivid pictures of the possible tragedy and then build confidence by describing the danger as far as possible. In this way, your audience will be relieved of their anxiety. Indignation versus pity. Injustice by use of power upon those who are helpless is what indignation means, and pity is the sympathy for someone's misfortune. So, if you want your audience to feel indignation, then you should exert your power on them. But if you want to get their sympathy, you should make your speech touch their compassion. Okay? Next is admiration versus envy. People will admire moral virtue, power, wealth, and beauty. If life's good is acquired through hard work, admiration will increase. So if you want your audience to feel admiration towards you, then your speech should be able to express your good side without being boastful. So that was the emotional proof. Now we're going to proceed to the 5 canons of rhetoric. The principal divisions of the art of persuasion established by ancient rhetoricians. So we have 5, okay? As I have said, 5. Invention, arrangement, style, delivery, and memory. Remember those 5, okay? So first is invention. Speakers hunt for arguments that will be effective in a particular speech. Mind is a storehouse of wisdom. Topoi is a Greek word meaning topics or places. It means stock arguments. So in the invention principle, this is where you gather a lot of information and arguments that will help you in different speeches. So you should remember it since the mind is a storehouse of wisdom. Remember, tupoi. Number 2, arrangement. Aristotle avoided complicated schemes of organization. There are 2 parts of speech for him, state the subject and then demonstrate. So in your introduction, capture the attention of your audience, establish your credibility, and then make your purpose clear. So basically, in rhetoric, you should avoid complicated arrangement of ideas and you should stick to this arrangement. Just capture the attention of your audience, establish your credibility, and make your purpose clear. We don't want to give mixed signals, okay? Number 3, style. Treatment of style in rhetoric focuses on metaphor. For Aristotle, metaphors are not just aids for comprehension or aesthetic appreciation. Metaphor help audience visualize, energizes listeners, and move them to action. So in rhetoric, make use of metaphors to help audience visualize and make them move. Don't use it just to be poetic. Some examples of metaphor in King's speech are as follows.
100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty, in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. And And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
So number 4, delivery. Audience reject delivery that seem planned or staged. Naturalness is persuasiveness. Presentation that calls for attention takes away from the argument. So when you make a speech or when you do public speaking, don't stick to your prepared speech and be natural. Don't ask for their attention. Attract their attention. Don't make jokes unrelated to your speech just to garner attention because it takes away from your arguments. Last but not the least, number 5, memory. Good speakers should draw upon collection of ideas stored in mind. So, dito po. King did not follow his prepared text exactly. He used lines he had used before in his other speeches and it was effective. As I have said, don't stick to your prepared speech. We have the principal invention so that you can store arguments in your mind. Take those stock knowledge and use it impromptu. Nowadays, we don't do public speaking every day and we also have teleprompters or script that can be read while doing speeches. Nowadays, memory is now equal to rehearsal. Now we are in the ethical reflection, Aristotle's golden mean. So I have a question. Is it ethical to alter a message to make it more acceptable for a particular audience? So, for Aristotle, a person is virtuous if he avoids extremes like being too sensitive and being too insensitive. He saw wisdom in the person who avoids excess on either side. But nowadays, we usually call it as play safe. And it has a negative connotation. So when somebody says play safe man siya, that is negative for us and we are also referring to it as fake. Or in our Filipino slang, we call it as plastic. However, for Aristotle, it is virtuous. For him, moderation is best. Aristotle is against speakers saying only what the audience wants to hear, or speakers who are scared to express what they think. He is equally against speakers who disregard audience's sensitivity and emotions. Golden mean, therefore, is in winsome straight talk, gentle assertiveness, and appropriate adaptation. Right here, we have Aristotle's middle way of communication practices. Right here, we have two extremes that appear to be the oversensitive side and the too insensitive side. So, we have the extreme lies and a brutal honesty. The golden mean for that is truthful statements. You don't use lies at the same time when expressing truths. You don't use harsh words, okay? And then we have the extremes, secrecy and soul-bearing, or giving too much private thoughts. The golden mean is transparency. So you don't keep secrets when doing speeches, but at the same time, you don't tell every private thoughts that you have. You should just be transparent. Sakto lang. Lastly, we have the extremes, cowardice and recklessness. So the golden mean is courage. I'm gonna give you an example for the last one. Cowardice in speeches stops you from expressing your thoughts. On the other hand, recklessness is being careless and you talk about your thoughts without limits. That is being reckless. So an example of a person who uses recklessness in his speeches is our President Duterte. No offense. He is too courageous that he becomes reckless when making speeches. He curses a lot, raises his voice, and he is also brutally honest, which does not lie on the golden mean. So, no hate to the president, okay? When you do public speaking, be sure to stick to the golden mean. Don't lie, don't keep secrets, and don't be a coward. Express yourself. At the same time, don't be brutally honest, don't be too open, and don't be reckless. Always consider your audience's feelings. In that way, you can use all means of persuasion. Now we are in the last part of the lesson. This is the critique for the rhetoric, so standing the test of time. Aristotle failed to define the exact meaning of enthymeme, and he has a confusing system of classifying metaphors. He has a blurred distinction between political and ceremonial speaking. In the book that we are given, political and ceremonial speaking doesn't have a clear distinction, and I had to read different meanings and search for different sources in order to really give a clear distinction between the two. He also failed to provide systematic study of logos, ethos, and pathos. He promised that it will be a systematic study, but it was not, so he failed in that aspect. The book is like an editorial jumble, okay? It is an editorial jumble. He writes his notes in his class. So everything that comes in his mind during that class, he writes it down. So it is an editorial jumble. And critics critique the rhetoric's view of the audience as passive. So passive meaning the rhetoric's view audiences as people who just accept what they are given. And we all know that audiences are not like that all the time. They also disagree, okay? Critics wish Aristotle considered a fourth component, which is situation. So there are three components: the author, the text, and the audience. And the critics hope that there is a fourth component, which is the situation. Despite the rhetoric's flaws and complexity, this work is still a foundation for studies related to social sciences and public speaking. That would be all. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you were able to understand the lesson. Okay, bye!